Dr. Flux here with another build guide. Today we're looking at the Juno. This is a flywheel blaster that shoots rival. Now before we jump into the build, there's a few things we're gonna go over. Number one is safety. This is a build that takes soldering, so we will be wearing safety goggles. In addition, I'm gonna turn it over to Luke to talk about LiPo Safety.
Read all the instructions that come with your charger, your battery, and check out our page that we will link down below, and it's also linked on many of our product listings. LiPo batteries can be dangerous if not handled correctly, so please keep that in mind.
Now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about the tools. So as you can see on the side here, we have a number 1 Phillips screwdriver, M2.5 Allen key. We have some CA glue, some thread locker, some slug slime, solder, soldering iron, some helping hands, a heat gun. Optionally, you can use a battery-powered drill with a couple bits. We have a number 1 Phillips, and then your M2.5 hex bit. And you're gonna need some wire strippers. On the table here, we have both the 3D printed parts and the hardware kit. So you can buy just the hardware kit, or you can purchase the hardware kit plus the 3D printed parts. It is worth noting that this small little TPU hop-up tab is included in the hardware kit if you do not want to print TPU. All the support documentation for this build is on our website. There is a very good wiring diagram from Perry. Also, there is a full build guide from Tarek on how to put this together. So let's go ahead and jump right into the build. The first step is we're going to install these 6 brass inserts into the main body. This is done with a soldering iron, and to make sure they're seated flush, I like to rub a flathead screwdriver on top. Now the other 4 are basically there if you would like to put Picatinny on the side or hold stir options. This version that I'm currently doing today does not have that. Next, we're going to install the ball detents. These are used to hold in the magazine. We're going to use a little drop of CA glue for that. I'm actually going to see if I can reach in there and put just a tiny drop inside the hole. You can see on the side in there, it's got a little bit. I'm going to fish in a detent right into there. Just to make sure that sets up nicely, I'm just going to give it a little spritz. And then onto the other side. And then when you're done with that, go ahead and test with a rival magazine. Should hold it in. Looks good. Next, we're going to install the brass insert into the battery door and make sure that's nice and flat. Next, we're gonna basically drop in these 4 hex nuts into the top and bottom center of each one of these parts. Then we're gonna install the square nuts. These just drop right in to the trap, one on that side and then one over here. Then we're gonna use these flathead screws to attach these parts. And I'll be using a number 1 Phillips screwdriver. Now to install the muzzle. This slides on like that, turn that down. Then we take our little hop-up tab, slide that in here. Once everything's in its place, we're gonna use these 2 M3 by 10 millimeter screws. Now we're gonna install the inner handle, and then we're gonna use 1 M3 by 10 millimeter screw. Once you got that piece on, we're gonna attach the main body. This goes on right here, and then we're gonna use another M3 by 10 millimeter screw to attach up here. Next, we're gonna put on the pusher wheel onto the pusher motor. You can see this is keyed and only can go on one way. And this is friction fit, so there's nothing locking that in, but it does not go anywhere. Next, we're gonna slide this into the motor housing. It holds onto the flywheel cage right here, and we use 2 of the countersunk flat screws. Now, if you're following along in the build guide, you'll notice that this support material has been removed. If you need help on removing that, it's real simple. You just take some pliers, reach in there, and just kind of break it. It falls right out. This part has already been prepped. Next up, we're gonna continue with the flywheel cage. Now, when you refer to the wiring diagram, you can see the polarities are already shown. We have positive on this side, negative on this side, and then it is reversed for this motor. Then we flip that over. We're gonna use some of the blue semi-permanent thread locker. Really do not need much of this. You're just gonna put a little bit on the threads and just make sure that that is flush. Now we're gonna go ahead and push on the flywheels. I like to support the back and then just press them on. This can be a little bit hard. Looks like this one can go down just a little bit. Yeah, looks good. Oh. Now we're gonna put everything in place before we start our wiring. This large switch goes here. Now keep in mind that the terminals are gonna be in this orientation. So you got your comm is gonna be facing that way so that there's a little spot where this pops in. And then this little switch, your comm is gonna be at the top. So this is comm, normally open, normally closed. That goes in right here. And while we're here, we're gonna go ahead and install the trigger. Anytime I have 3D printed parts touching 3D printed parts and they move, I like to add just a little bit of slug slime, not much. This is what's called a 2-stage trigger. So after we put the spring in, it's going to keep that bottom switch engaged First, we're gonna do the pusher motor. I did pull this back out because it's a little easier to wire up if it's out. Now, I'm gonna plug this in just so you can easily see as to which polarity, basically which one we're soldering to which lead. I have noticed that there's a little bit of material that needs snipped off right here. So we're gonna go ahead and clean that up a little bit because we're gonna go directly onto this motor here. We're just gonna tend these tips here. Everything else is a little bit easier after you get this one. And it should look something like that when you're done. Now we can go ahead and plop this in there and we're gonna wire up the motors. We're gonna go ahead and strip this section here. I like to keep it just about like that so that I can do this one after I do this one. I'll take this lead and I'll ever so slightly turn it, not too much, you don't wanna break these. Then I just drop the wire right on there. It does help if you tend these beforehand, but I think we'll be okay. Now, I like to cut it right about here. You can strip that. You also want a little slack. You don't want this to be too tight. Now, if you need help with soldering, we recommend using these solder spacers. This is just to make sure that you do not bridge from your connection to the motor housing. I've done quite a bit of soldering in the past, so it's very unlikely I usually bridge that. But if you're nervous, I highly recommend using these. At this point, I like to check the polarity of the motor. So at this part, it's a little bit confusing, but we're actually gonna use the black wire into positive and then the red wire into negative. As we can see, that is going the right direction to feed rival rounds into the flywheels. The positive wire is actually gonna get tagged onto the negative of the flywheel motors. And I'm actually gonna terminate this because we're gonna switch over to this black wire. So we'll go ahead and snip that, strip that. We're gonna go ahead and do the negative. So this is gonna go out the back to the battery to about there. Then we're gonna tag this motor here. I'm gonna spread this one open so I can actually put it over the post. Now, if you ever do something like this where this is a lot of extra, we can actually do that, but if you want, you can actually do something like this. And then you just pull that forward. Now you got this area here. And check that connection, looks good. Now that we got all three of these wires, I like to pretty much figure out how this is gonna go through the channel. This top one, we can use the top section. Second one, we can go here. And the third wire can go through here. Now we're gonna end the negative lead. So we're actually gonna cut it right about here. This will be soldered into the normally closed. Positive lead here, we're gonna tag the normally open in the center and then the normally closed down here. And then we're gonna tag this and run the positive all the way up to the battery compartment. So let's strip this. And that goes on to COM. Gonna make our life a little bit easier and just pop that out. Helping hands, hold that. Go ahead and stick that back in. Check the switch, looks good. Coming off the pusher motor, we have the negative. This comes down and will tag right onto the COM. Off of the flywheel motors, this negative line is gonna tag right onto the normally closed. Now, before I button everything up, I'm gonna just do a quick test, make sure all the wiring is good. Take a rival round, throw that in there, put that in here. Now I am running off of a pack of AA's, so the rev is not gonna be as fast as a LiPo, but let's try it out. That looks good. Let's go ahead and tuck this all in and button it up. We're just gonna feed this in here because we're gonna basically finish our XD60 connection. And I like to go on this side of the motors because I wanna stay clear of this moving wheel. Go ahead and snip here. And I like to cut about that much, usually just something a little bit longer than the actual XD60. And don't forget to slide these on before you do anything else. I typically, when I solder these, I like to give it the other side just to help with the heat transfer and everything. We use helping hands. We'll do the negative first. It also helps if you pre-tin, but I think we'll be fine on this one. You can also run this up as it's still hot. It'll kind of grab on. We'll flip it and do the positive. Now that we got that, we'll hit that with a heat gun. Let's pull that off. And then for this part, I actually take a pair of needle nose and I'll kind of spread this open a little bit and slide that over. Might need a little bit more. And get it to right about the edge. And I hit it with a heat gun again. And just to make sure everything looks good, I like to test. Everything's looking good. Now we're gonna put on the back plate. This is secured with 2 of the M3 by 10 millimeter screws. We can also put on the battery cover. Next, we're going to install these 2 square nuts into the handle. They go right here. They just drop right in and right here. Then we're going to put this onto here using the M3 by 25 millimeter screws. Keep in mind there is an actual longer screw. The 30 millimeter, as you can see, is just a little bit longer. Make sure you're using the right one. So this section here is the M3 by 25. When you're done, make sure the trigger feels good and there's nothing hanging up on the trigger pull. So now we're gonna put one M3 by 30 up in this corner, making sure not to pinch any cables. Now to put this plate on here, it's gonna be another 3 M3 by 30. And you're probably gonna have to work some of these wires to make sure they're not in the way. And finally, we're gonna install the sling point. This is done by dropping in the square nut into here. And we just drop this in. And then our last M3 by 25 screw goes right in there. And there you have it. That's how you build the Juno. I hope this is helpful for people. I'm Dr. Flux. I want to thank you for watching. As always, be safe and happy foam flinging.